My name is Zayne Turner, and I have the awesome job of getting to talk to people like you who are building on our platform about how to build on our platform. And tonight we're having a special session to talk about a new way of building in Lightning called Lightning Web Components. But I'm not here alone, actually. I'm joined by several awesome people, one of which I'm going to shout out right now. He's got to vault himself over from the couch. So Kevin Venkiteswaran is an architect who helped build this new way of building. So he's here, and if I get anything horribly wrong, he's going to jump in to set us back on track. But also, we'll be doing Q&A together. Yep. Anything else you want to add right now?
No, I'm excited to be here.
Right? So, OK. So before we dive too far in, of course, the most important slide ever is if you're here to make a purchasing decision, I would ask you to reconsider why you're here in the first place. But if you decide to stay anyway, don't make your decisions based on anything that I might say about the awesome technology potentially coming in the future. Make it based on the completely awesome technology that is available today. And Lightning Web Components, which we're talking about tonight, will be GA in spring. You can see up there in the corner, which means in just a few weeks, it's going to hit production orgs everywhere, and you'll be able to build with it in any org. And we're going to look at what this means for you tonight. So before I dive into what the rest of the slide has and the other slides, who's heard the phrase Lightning Web Components? Awesome. Who has seen maybe the Release Readiness Live or our event last week and has already dove in a bit? OK, good. If you didn't raise your hand, don't worry. You're going to catch up very quickly. And if you did already dive in, thank you so much for visiting this again with me. So Lightning Web Components is a new model for writing component code in Lightning Experience. So the way you've been doing it to now is the Aura framework, is how we're calling it now, so that you know which one we're talking about. And together, Aura and Lightning Web Components are the way you can build components in Lightning. You have two options. And what's different about Lightning Web Components, as this slide is hinting at, is that it's built on modern web standards. And that's really what I want to talk to you about tonight. What does that actually mean? How does it make it different? What is it going to mean for you as people who are trying to build with this technology? And what does it mean for the tools you're going to use? So that's what we're going to go through. Some highlights here. Building in Lightning Web Components gives you several benefits, three of which are you're going to get enhanced productivity. We're going to show you what that means, but that's something that comes with web standards now. You're going to get better performance. It's going to be faster for people that are using the stuff you built. And you're going to see that it's easy to use and compatible with the stuff you're already using, whether that's you're providing components to people and it's visible in Lightning App Builder and they can configure them the way they want in Lightning App Builder, you can still do that. We've built a whole bunch of stuff in Aura, and we like how it's working in Aura. Now we want to add to it with Lightning Web Components. You can also do that, and we're going to look at that tonight. So I want to start by going back to when we talk about web standards and why are we talking about Lightning Web Components being built on them. We're going to look at a little timeline. So back in 2014, which is when we started building Aura, well, not me, but Kevin and his colleagues, started building things like Aura, the web was different. So those of you in the back who maybe can't see this, there's a tiny orange box at the bottom that has a few things in it. We're ECMAScript 5. We have some kinds of standard events and some special rendering capabilities. And that's what your browser knew how to do back in 2014. But single-page apps, modern apps even at that time, needed to do even more. So then we get frameworks in the picture. So things like, I don't know, anyone remember something called Angular, Backbone, hundreds and hundreds of other things. They enter the picture to try to solve the problem of how do you give a rich experience in a browser that only knows how to do this much, but users expect, or we want to provide users this much more. So then we start seeing answers coming in the form of frameworks. And Aura was also providing its own set of answers, which was great because you got to start building really cool apps. But the problem comes when the fact that everyone has their own answer. The Backbone way of doing it is not the same as the React way of doing it, or the Spring way of doing it, or whatever you might be using that day. And then as frameworks disappear, if you're trying to run a business or build something that's supposed to last more than 5 weeks, how do you do that, right? Not that that was ever a problem for anyone in the room. So the answer comes with getting more standardization. And this slide is maybe a fictitious interpretation of what happened, but you get we're going high and to the right, in that then standards bodies like W3C and other bodies start stepping into the picture. Magic. No. We're going to look at that in the next slide.
It's actually
Yes.
real. It's actually quite real. So that line is effectively like, what's the JavaScript surface area for the language? And it was only back like mid-2010, 2012, when ES6 finally landed, and that was a multi-year adventure to go from basically ES4 to get us to 5. And that's where we saw the language sort of go from this sort of like play thing to something where it finally got to the point where you could build a real application, take back real software engineering stuff to build on top of this.
Yes.
Douglas Crockford left the committee or something and stopped blocking it.
You're the one who stood up. No.
A lot of things came together, and it's not just that, but it was also, as you're going to get to, sort of people looking at it and saying, all these things in sort of like userland in the community, the developer world, are solving these problems. Let's start aligning. There's a problem out there, and we need to create some base alignment.
Yep. And that's exactly, now we see more orange, less green, which is good because now the standards like the browser know how to do things in a more uniform way, right? We agree that this is how we want to have things like web components. We want to have things like templates or custom elements, and we're going to look at what that means, but we agree on an approach to the common set of problems. And so now that this is baked into more of the technology you get when you fire up IE11, right? Especially IE11. Or Chrome, or any of the ways that you're experiencing the web today, the thing that you're using, on whatever device you're using, already knows how to do much more. So then frameworks can do more specialized things. And when we talk about Salesforce then, it could be things like data services. How do you work with our data in a secure way, in a performant way, or very specialized UI services. So what we need to make in a proprietary sense gets smaller. And this is the shift in how the web behaves that's happened behind the scenes. So then enter Lightning Web Components. Lightning Web Components is going to use what's already out there in the world and then deliver those specialized services that you're used to from Salesforce. Right? We have things like Lightning Data Service, or the security you're used to working with on our platform, or if we're talking about specialized UI, base Lightning components, right? Those things that you're used to being able to build quickly and build correctly on our platform, that's what Lightning Web Components is offering you the chance to do. And you're doing it with less proprietary stuff. You're going to use stuff that is accessible all over the web. You're going to be able to find answers in more places than that one Salesforce developer documentation thing that you Googled for 5 hours and you bookmarked because it had your one special answer. That's not the case here. And we're going to look at that. So we get more benefits now. More standards, less proprietary stuff. Everyone agrees this is how we're going to solve this problem, and it's shared across industries. There's a common model. And you in the room today, if you are not familiar with this way of programming and you decide to spend time learning it, you're going to be getting skills that are applicable to lots of other things, lots of other problems. If you're someone who's coming in the door, used to developing on the web today, you're going to be able to solve problems on the Salesforce platform faster. It just makes that ability to be skillful easier for everyone. And, which is what I just said in that other bullet, and did I mention that it's faster? And we're going to look at that. This slide is showing the fact that if you've already invested in Aura, that's awesome. You don't have to leave it behind, because Lightning Web Components and Aura Components together are the Lightning framework. They work together all the time, and in fact, they've been working together in your orgs up to now, and you didn't even know it. Because under the hood, a lot of the Lightning-based components and a lot of the UI you're used to in Lightning Experience have been Lightning Web Components. They exist on the page, and you as a user, you don't need to know which one you're using. It's just all the good stuff you get in Lightning. And as a developer, you can use both of them. And sometimes you don't have to know which one you're using, because it's all the good stuff you can build with in Lightning. And we're going to look at that. So, are we ready to get out of slides and get into the demo?
Yeah.
The middle of the room, are you ready? All right, great. So let's do that. There we go. OK, so we know Trailhead, right? And a great resource that's on Trailhead is the sample gallery. So if you add You can't see this here because it's a tiny, tiny browser. If you add /en/sample gallery when you're on Trailhead to your URL, we aren't in the top level nav yet, it's coming. You're going to get to the sample gallery. And this has 6 apps right now for you to explore. And what they're going to illustrate is how to build stuff on the platform. We have 6 different use cases, different fictional companies, showing you how to use the stuff that we have and combine it in the ways that might be useful to you. And we're going to look at 2 of these samples today, I think, but primarily this first one, recipes, which is taking a moment to load, but that's okay. And what recipes is small examples of common problems or common tasks you're probably going to have to do. And they're going to show you how to build it in Lightning Web Components in about 30 lines of code or less. So we're going to start our exploration of this new framework in this recipes sample app. And so what that looks like here is I've got a Scratch org where I've loaded in the source code. If you click on any of those tiles on Trailhead, it's going to take you to GitHub because the code is there for you to explore. You can see how we've built everything. And I've taken the code from GitHub and I've pushed it into a Scratch org here, and this is what the app itself looks like. So we have here recipes, and at the top, these tabs are all organized by topic. So I'm going to zoom in so that even in the back we can see we have hello here. It's going to be the basics of let's get you used to the new syntax, and we're going to start with those hello recipes. Then it's going to go into how do I work with Apex? If I need to get at my Apex classes or use them, what am I going to do there? How do I work with Lightning Data Service? And then getting into more advanced topics like composition. How do you start nesting components within each other and getting more rich experiences? And then all the way to different kinds of intercomponent communication. And something else, a tab you're going to want to make sure you visit, is then how do you work with stuff in Aura? And how do you get Lightning Web Components and Aura components to maybe work side by side, or to even get them to work together in a single application, embedding them together. So we're going to visit a few of these recipes today. If I move too fast or if you have other questions that don't get answered, you should definitely go check out this app yourself and spend some time looking at the code in recipes. Cool?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Bonnie. Okay. So now back to VS Code to show you what this actually means. Okay. So I'm here in Visual Studio Code. And there are a couple things that if you are just getting started with this tooling, who here is already using Visual Studio Code? Who here is using something like Illuminated Cloud? Okay, great. If you haven't yet set up a tool, a big change with Lightning Web Components is that you cannot build Lightning Web Components with our good old friend, the developer console. So that's a change. And that's why now you're going to start seeing that we're doing things like showing you Visual Studio Code or Illuminated Cloud, other full, real IDEs or integrated development environments. Because, as we're going to look at, there's more tooling associated with building in this new way. And as I just spent some time telling you, it's not just our tooling. It's tooling that exists in the world. And the way that you can get all of those things integrated together is not, unfortunately, right now, our good friend, the developer console. So in order to build good Lightning Web Components, and in order, in fact, to build them at all, you're going to want to make the switch to an IDE. So I've done a few things here with Visual Studio Code. I've downloaded it, step 1. The second thing is this little box right here is actually how you get to the extensions marketplace. So this is how you can add other functionality into Visual Studio Code. And if I look at my installed, you can see maybe I've done this once or twice these days. So I've installed a whole bunch of stuff, and Salesforce is what I searched for because Salesforce is publishing extensions for Visual Studio Code that are free for you to download. We're not the only ones publishing them, but if you want stuff written by us, you're going to see it in Visual Studio Code. So I've downloaded a few things, and the ones you're going to want to look for are the Salesforce extension pack is the first thing. So let me close this menu here. So the Salesforce extension pack is your one-stop shop. In about 3 weeks, that will be the sole source of truth. You download this, you're going to be good to go. Because in this extension pack, you're going to get several different things bundled all together. For those of you in the back, I'm scrolling, and you're seeing that's a whole bunch of these extensions are all included in this extension pack. Right now, though, if you want to build Lightning Web Components, you're going to need to download another extension, and it is the Lightning Web Components extension. And this has the tooling that's going to give you a rich experience building Lightning Web Components. So you're going to want to have all of those things on your machine. So we have our extensions, and then the other thing we've downloaded is the Salesforce CLI. So who's used the CLI? Awesome. If you haven't, that's how you do Salesforce stuff. It's what the CLI is, right? It's very complicated. If you want to be able to develop Salesforce things and have stuff on your computer and send it up to a Salesforce org, you're going to want to use the CLI to do that. It's the, sort of the go-between. So the extensions give you the experience in the IDE, and the CLI lets you get your work done. OK, so I have.
Does everybody know what a CLI is?
You want to tell people what a CLI is?
I'm no expert on it, but I didn't know it until about.
No, that's a great question. So the CLI is command line interface. Great call out. It's a tool that you install on your computer that lets you run different commands, and you're going to use a special syntax to interact with it, and you're going to see what it looks like in just a minute. But thank you, Pat, for keeping me honest. So I'm going to use what's called the command palette, and I'm using some shortcut keys to get to it. You can look it up. But this is a sort of a central menu you're going to find throughout Visual Studio Code. And what's cool about the command palette is, as we just brought up, the CLI has a special syntax to get stuff done. If you don't want to memorize that syntax or you don't know it, the command palette lets you not have to do that. It gives you a menu of, and I'm going to look for SFDX, and now I'm seeing a whole bunch of options here. So right now, I could create a Lightning Web Component, and it's going to ask me a series of questions. Where do I want to put this component? And we're seeing a path here. And if I open up my File Explorer real quick, let me get this big enough so that everyone can see. You can see it's because I'm open to a Salesforce DX project on my computer. So I have lots of things I can do within this project. If I change my window real quick, I'm in VS Code still. But if I open up my File Explorer, I'm not anywhere. I'm not in a project. I'm just in a new window in Visual Studio Code. So if I open the command palette now and search for Salesforce DX, notice the difference here? It's a lot less exciting. And that's because this way of interacting with the Salesforce CLI is trying to help you not do silly things already, which is great. The Salesforce CLI needs to be in a project to be able to do Salesforce stuff. It's just, it's like, who used the Eclipse-based Force.com IDE back in the day? It was the same thing of you had to create a project to start stuff. A project is just a grouping of files. That's all it is. It doesn't have to become a discrete package. It doesn't have to be everything in my org all the time, and it probably should not be everything in your org all the time. It could be the things you're building for this release. It could be the things you're building that day. It's just a group of files. That's all a project is, okay? So I don't have a project, so the Salesforce CLI is here saying, do you want to go ahead and make one, and then we can get to work? And that's why if you are in Visual Studio Code and you're wondering why it looks different, that's probably why. It's using the context of where am I on your machine and what do you want me to do to try to give you better suggestions. So if I go back to now my actual project, we can see that when I open up the command palette, I have a lot of options. So we're going to create a Lightning Web Component here together really quickly. And let's do it so that we can see what we're doing. So it's going to ask me where do I want to store it. And when you create a project, by default, you're going to get 2 folders under this Force App main default. This is where all your metadata is going to live. All the stuff you want to send to and from an org is going to live in this area. And this LWC folder is where your Lightning Web Components live. You're also going to get an Aura folder, which is where any wild guesses about what might live there?
Aura.
Y'all are sharp. Exactly. So you're going to get those 2 files by default. You can add more if you want, and we'll look at some of those in a minute. But I'm going to put this in my default Lightning Web Components folder. And then the next thing it's asking me is, well, what do you want to call this component? So give it a very creative name. Right here, we're going to call our bundle Hello San Fran. And when I press Enter, now down here in the back, there's a pop-up that's letting me know that the Salesforce CLI is running the command of SFDX force create Lightning Web Component -- type LWC -n Hello San Fran. And you didn't have to do that by hand, which is nice, right? So now we have a new bundle created, and it's opened up the JavaScript file for us by default. And if we open up our File Explorer again, notice that it's moved us to the right folder. So I'm going to see exactly where in my project I am. So I got a folder called Hello San Fran, And we got 3 files by default. The Salesforce CLI created 3 things for us. We see a JavaScript file already. We got an HTML file, which I'm just going to open and we'll look at in a minute. And we got an XML file. So those are the 3 things you're going to get by default. So let's start in our HTML file. Anyone notice anything about this super exciting file?
Simple.
It's simple. Yeah, that's exactly it. That's what you should notice. And if I hover over it, another awesome thing that comes in with the tooling I've installed is I'm getting IntelliSense or hinting about what this is. And do you notice the words Salesforce, Lightning?
Nope.
Yeah, it's because it's not a Salesforce thing. So in the world of Visualforce, you might be used to seeing things like Apex page, or in the world of Aura components, you would see Aura : component. It would begin and end with Salesforce stuff. This is part of that shift of modern web standards. Our HTML file is beginning and ending with a standard HTML tag, the template tag. So now within this tag, I can use other things, like if I want to use like standard HTML tags, and I'm getting more completion here because I'm working in Visual Studio Code. And Visual Studio Code down here in the right hand, you can't see it, thinks I'm in an HTML file, which I am, which is great. So then I'm getting the rich tooling that's available for me in this IDE for HTML stuff. Super awesome. But if I'm going to go ahead and use Salesforce stuff, like, I don't know, any of the 70-some base components there, notice what I'm getting here? I'm getting a list of Salesforce stuff. Yep. And as I go through, I can get some documentation about it. Let's say I do something like lightning button. And then I go in, and I'm like, OK, I want to have lightning. Ooh, let's spell it correctly. That always helps. And you'll notice that lovely red squiggles that you're getting, that in real-time linting. So if I have lightning button, and I'm like, oh my, I've forgotten the exact attribute names for lightning button, and I hover over it, look at this lovely little thing that I get. And if I click on it, it's taking me to a magical place called the component library. Who's seen the component library? It's going to be your new best friend. This is worth bookmarking. So it took me not only to the component library, but it took me to the component library to tell me specifically about lightning button, the thing I needed. And if I don't remember the attribute names, I get it right here. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's right. I need to give it a name and some of these other stuff. So all within my IDE, I'm already getting a little more efficient. So let's go back to code now. Ooh. There we go. And we're going to go back into our recipes app. OK, so basic HTML, our base components are here as well. We're going to look at a more robust example, but that's what's going on in our HTML file. Let's go ahead and open up our JavaScript file again. So now, by default, we get 2 lines of JavaScript. We get this import statement up here, and we get an export statement down here. This is the part now we're talking about ES6+. This is now standard JavaScript syntax of we're going to bring in some functionality, and I also want to give this thing a name so that it's known by other things in my namespace. So this fact that we have this default class of Hello San Fran, that's my component right here, right?
Yep.
Lightning element. Kevin, you want to tell us about lightning element? I love this.
Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm curious, actually, you had asked a question
Thank
before,
you.
which is like, who knows what ES6 means? Okay, just a couple hands. So
Yeah.
why don't we talk about that? So,
Yeah.
so JavaScript, formerly in spec goes by, not the name JavaScript, it actually goes by ECMAScript. And so there's a very, very confusing versioning scheme where you can have numbers or years and they're intermixed and they're super confusing. ES6, so ECMAScript 6, came out in, I'm guessing, 2015, I think is what the year was. I always mix the years and the numbers up and which is official and what's the pseudonym. But in any case, it's sort of like the modern version of JavaScript that I touched on before. So that's what ES6 is all about. So when we mention like modern JavaScript and ES6, that's what we're referring to, just sort of modern JavaScript. So you have these things like import statements and classes, and we'll see a bunch of other things there too.
Yep.
So what lightning element is here, or maybe we should actually talk about maybe line 1. We'll explain line 1. So this import statement, so new to JavaScript, but you've probably used elsewhere, like in Apex or in Java or other programming languages, you can basically now start to bundle logic or capability together into modules. And then you can share capability across those modules. So all that literally is doing is saying, I want to import this thing called Lightning Element from some module named LWC, which is our core Lightning Web Components engine. So what we're importing here is our base element, Lightning Element. So then the following line, we'll skip the first two keywords for a sec. We're saying we're going to create a class called Hello Sanfran that extends Lightning Element. So basically a child, an inherited or child, or a base class, or a child class, right, of our base class called Lightning Element. And what Lightning Element is, which is I'll talk about for a sec, is it actually just extends HTML elements. So it actually extends the standard HTML element. There's no magic, there's no trickery here. It literally just extends the standard HTML element and provides you some more capability. So we do a bunch of things like default ability to do accessibility and a bunch of other stuff just to make your development experience easier, and you sort of get the good standards that you'd expect out of the box. You don't have to do it yourself. The export default basically says, like the inverse of the line 1 is, I want to export something. So I want to share something outside of this file. And you need to share as the export and the default thing that you export, so we know that this is a component. And so we'll probably get to a point, or maybe touch on other code, where we sort of export other things that aren't just component code, which is pretty cool and an interesting way to organize code, which is very different than what you did in Aura.
You said the versioning of JavaScript is ECMAScript.
ECMA, so ECMA.
ECMA, got it.
Yeah.
ECMAScript.
But the great thing about it, and as you're hitting on, is like, these are all just standards. So you don't have to go to like a Salesforce doc website to go and figure out like what is ES6 and so forth. You can just Google for like what is ES6, and you'll get about 100 million hits.
Yep.
And one of the first ones is definitely going to be the Mozilla Developer Network. They've got fantastic online documentation, interactive, great resource, but so does like Google's got great stuff. And again, 100 other million websites and blogs have stuff because it's all just standards.
I have a question here.
So,
What I want to know are all the available libraries to import. Is there any place?
There are, yes. So, and we're going to look at a few of those recipes, but there are a lot of libraries available for you to import, and a great place to go check them out, now that my windows are all completely out of order, is this amazing Lightning Component library and the developer guide. It's going to give you lists of a lot of different libraries, and we're going to look at some more tonight, but the platform has a lot of resources for you to import, yes. Yep.
And the other one I'll touch is in the IDE, like you were saying about IntelliSense, we also do IntelliSense for all those modules automatically for you. So as you're typing, and you can, I think the key press on Mac is Command space.
Yep.
I think it's Command or Control. We'll basically say like, what's the available next set of characters I can type?
Yeah.
So maybe it's not Command space.
It's not going to be there, but
All right.
we're going to look at it in another recipe, so we're going to come to that, yes.
okay, so the way I understand that import is go and get this chunk of code so you don't have to write it, and you can use these methods and these tags and all of that. And you're telling it where to get it from, but I would expect it to be like a long URL. Where is LWC? Where is it getting that from? Is this like become
Base
a-
directory.
That's a great question. So there's
What?
this, the technical answer is super confusing because that's one of like the funny things about ES6. But basically, the value is going to be always a quote. It's always a string, and it's going to follow one of for what we do in Salesforce. And if you go and look outside of Salesforce, they always are strings. And it's basically going to be what's the package name. So for us, LWC is sort of this special magic thing because every Lightning Web Component's got to do this. So we just call it LWC, nice and short. But if you're going to share logic between your own things, well, I think you're going to show that.
We're gonna show
how
that.
do you,
Yeah.
what is that nomenclature, and how do you do the cross packages and
So,
stuff
so
like that?
LWC is like hidden in the org?
Essentially you can think about it as being part of the platform.
Yes.
It's part of Lightning itself.
Okay. It's part of org.
It's like doing the aura tag, only instead of doing it for every component, you do it just at the beginning of your file.
Exactly.
That's a good analogy.
Okay.
Yep. So let's move on to the XML file real quick, and then we're going to dive into a real recipe because you're going to actually see it in action. It's going to make a lot more sense when we're not just looking at the default code provided by the CLI, which is pretty exciting by itself. So the last thing we're going to show, this is my favorite file. Kevin has his favorite bit, which we're going to look at as well, and it's pretty awesome. But the XML file is my favorite thing about Lightning Web Components, and it's because it gets a lot more powerful. So right now you're going to see, okay, it declares it as a Lightning Component bundle. That's the metadata type. If you're looking to say, is it compatible with packaging? What can I do with this thing? And you're going to the completely awesome metadata coverage report, which you should be checking all the time, and we're going to look at that. You're going to look for Lightning Component Bundle to know what you can do with it. We're also getting an API version, so API 45, because we're on a Spring org. And then this is exposed, false right now, is essentially right now, think about it as, can I use this in Lightning App Builder? Or can I only refer to it programmatically in another component in a way I want to control, right? This is essentially an Aura if you were used to adding the available for page types or record pages. It's kind of doing the same thing there, but it's going to get even more exciting when we look at another recipe about exposing it to different Lightning pages. Okay, so now that we see the basic syntax, let's get rid of our Hello San Fran bundle. We're not going to save any changes because we didn't do anything here. And I want to go back into my org, in fact, and let's look at a recipe in action. So let's just get all our windows together. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go to the Hello tab here. And as I said, these get from basic to more complex. And this left-hand column has just the simplest of the recipes. And the one that I want us to start with is actually down here in the corner, this hello binding. And those of you in the back, forgive me. I'm going to try to zoom in as best I can. But this hello binding recipe we have some text displayed here that just says hello world by default. And then we have a Lightning input field. That's what it is. It's a place where I can enter some text. And it already has world in it. And if I get rid of world and I start typing, we can see, we're noticing, right, that little magic of what I typed is now showing up in the UI. How magical and wonderful. And this is called hello binding because we're going to talk about data binding. How do you get what the user is typing and how are we displaying it? And that's what this recipe shows. So let's go look at the code. We're going to zoom back out. So we're going to go, now the tab was hello, so the recipe name is going to begin with hello too, if you're trying to match these things up. So we're going to look at hello binding, and I want to start in the HTML file. So we saw it had the title of hello binding, and you'll notice here these lightning dashes, what are those again?
Lightning components.
Yes! So we have a Lightning card, our Lightning-based component here called hello binding, and then we just have some simple HTML right here. And we have this class equals SLDSM around medium. Is this looking familiar to anybody?
Yep.
Yeah. The Lightning design system, you can also use it right here. So just HTML and CSS. And then we have this thing called greeting. And we have these curly braces around it. And if the IntelliSense stops trying to help me, this is how you bind data in Lightning Web Components. Just the curly braces and then the value in the middle. You don't need to do quotes. There's no exclamation point. It's just those curly braces. And in your HTML file, this is going to mark it as, this is going to be dynamic. This is a property. Okay? So we're giving it a name. We have something called greeting here that's dynamic. Down below, you'll notice similar things are happening with our base component here. Value equals greeting, on change equals handle change. These again are just flagging these as these are going to be things that are coming from your JavaScript file. They're properties. And on change, as we can see, as we hover over right there, it's just a standard event. It's just happening. And because it's an input field, it's going to fire whenever I'm typing. Okay? So let's open up our JavaScript file. And now we're seeing there's a little more going on. So line 1, our default syntax was import Lightning element. But now you can see we've got this comma track going on here. We're importing a bit more functionality from our Web Components engine. And we're seeing the same default class behavior. But then in between now, we have this @track thing, which is called a decorator. And we're going to talk about it in a minute. I'll probably make Kevin talk about it in a second. I'm giving it a name of greeting. And I'm initializing it to a value of world. We're giving it a string value. And then down below, this is the name of our function, our handle change function, and it takes an event as its parameter here. And this .greeting equals event target value, we're just doing some data binding, okay, in our JavaScript. So @track is a special decorator. And Kevin, I tend to like to show this by removing @track and then pushing to the Scratch org. Should we do that first and then you can talk about track, or do you want to talk first?
No.
Okay, so we're going to do a little science experiment. Are you ready?
Oh, yeah.
So we're going to get rid of the track decorator. I'm going to save my file. And now you'll notice a few things are happening. One of which is, of course, as we see, this red squiggle here on line 1 is now appearing because we're getting a linting error. And this little gray thing here, it's hard to see, is telling me what tool is unhappy. So ESLint is not a Salesforce thing. It is a standard linting tool that ships with the Lightning Web Components extension. It's bundled with it when you install it in VS Code. And what it does is it helps you write cleaner code. It does static code analysis and does things like saying, hey, you declared this thing track, you're not actually using it. Do you need it in your code? So it's giving me an error because I'm probably not being as efficient as I could be. But we're going to ignore the red squiggle for now. And I'm going to go now to my integrated terminal. And we'll get a little more real estate here. So we saw the command palette before, that little menu that lets you work with the Salesforce CLI. But you can also just work directly with it. So I'm going to do that now. And we're going to send the component that we just changed up to my Scratch org. So we're going to go ahead and use the command or the terminal here. And I'm going to just do a basic force source push. It'll take a few seconds. And we'll get the output of what we pushed. And we see that we added our very exciting Hello San Fran bundle, Victory 1. But then we changed our Hello binding. We got rid of that track decorator. So now let's go back into our org. And I really need to get this tab figured out. OK, and we're going to refresh the page. So we remember what our Hello binding recipe did before, right? When I typed, it updated. It was magical and wonderful. All right. And now what's happening?
Nothing.
Exactly. Magic is gone. So now, Kevin, do you want to talk about that track decorator?
So tracking, we'll see a couple of them, but let's first talk about, just for a sec, the @ symbol. So the @ symbol is an emerging standard with JavaScript, and they call it decorator. And what it does is it allows other developers to basically extend the language itself with new capability. So we're using that, so it's standard JavaScript again. We're using it and adding this thing called track. And what that does is it tells our engine, we want to make this variable basically a private reactive variable. So anytime it changes, tell the component it's going to have to re-render.
So who here built stuff in Aura? OK. Who remembers if you called something its name in the HTML file, the Aura component markup file, and then you gave it the same name in your JavaScript file, and you manipulated it, what would happen?
You had to use component set.
Sometimes, yep. But you also, it would just update itself, because data binding was two-way in Aura, right? As long as the names matched, I knew to update it. It was all beautiful and good. That is beautiful and good sometimes, and then other times it's kind of inefficient and leaky. And in Lightning Web Components, data binding is what we call one way. So the reason we're going to need to keep track of this is because the data binding itself isn't provided for you in the same way. And the other thing you'll notice is in Aura, we wouldn't have needed to use this handle change because of that two-way data binding. So the @track means re-render the UI, but the reason it's showing the thing I'm typing in is this event right here. If I deleted this event and we had the @track decorator, any guesses what would happen? Yeah, it would look the same as missing that track decorator, because it's line 7 here where we're saying, hey, as someone's typing, please update the value of greeting. Rebind this attribute, please. And then the track decorator then lets the engine know, oh, when this attribute greeting, when its value changes, I need to do something in the UI. I need to react. And that's that two-step magic here. Cool, that's Hello binding. Yeah.
You say var or let for defining that variable. Is that, normally you do that, right?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So new with classes in JavaScript is that when you declare a variable effectively immediately as a child of the class itself, you don't have to do that. You're basically saying this is actually part of the prototype of that class. So effectively, in other languages, it's just sort of like, this is part of the class. So the let, the vars, the const still exist, but they are scoped differently. So this is attached to Hello binding. And I think we're going to look at other code that actually uses, for example, let and const.
So just a quick, so if I drop the track, greeting just becomes effectively an instance variable for that class?
Yeah, so it remains an instance variable, and it is an instance variable here, and that's a good question. So if we just drop track as you had done in that sample, we still have that handle change, and so that event still fires, that method still gets invoked.
Yeah.
We set the variable, but it doesn't re-render. And so you'll get these types of warnings, because you might be thinking to yourself, well, how do I know what do I need to track and don't I? And the engine will tell you in your browser, for example, if you open the dev console, hey, you're using something in the template and it's changed, but you don't have track on it. This might be an issue.
So if we weren't tracking it, would we need something before greeting it? Would we need to declare var const?
Nope.
Just greeting.
It then becomes something that you can use, say, in other areas of your code.
Right.
But if it's something that you want the UI to be aware of and to re-render, you're going to want to get friendly with track.
The other thing I guess I would say is on line 7, we address it by calling it this.greeting, right? It's not just greeting alone, because it's not just a variable scope to like lexical scope, so it's not within braces. It's actually attached to the hello binding class, so therefore attached to the instance.
The last thing I want to show you before we jump onto a slightly more complicated recipe is I just want to take a peek at my favorite file, because why not? The XML file. So we see that we have our 2 lines that we got from the CLI, our API version, and our is exposed, and now suddenly this is true. And we have this whole targets and target XML going on. And we see this lightning double score app page, lightning double underscore record page, lightning double underscore home page. Any guesses what I'm doing there?
Making it available in
Yes.
Lightning App Builder.
Yes, I am. And I am, in fact, able to name explicitly the pages I want. And we're going to look at other recipes that you can even control more tightly. If I want hello binding to behave one way on a Lightning app page and a completely different way on a Lightning record page, you get to do that now. And you get to do it in one file. Yes, it's incredible. And we're going to look at that recipe.
And this is where you expose the configuration globals,
Yes, exactly. Yep, it's all in one place.
right?
Okay, so let's look at another recipe here. And I want to zoom a little bit. Oh man, we're just going to do this all night, aren't we? Okay, so we're going to come back to looking at expressions and some of this other stuff in a minute, but I want to jump a little bit forward in time, and I want to talk about how you get at your apex. Is that cool with everybody?
Yep.
So we're going to jump to the apex tab. And here we go. And I want to actually go all the way over to the right, and we're going to look at this apex wire method with params, because we were just talking about decorators and other things, so I think this is a good next move for us. And you can see I have a search field here. The ability to go ahead and search for contacts is what it is, and I have a lovely little cheat sheet right here of listing contacts in the org, so let's go ahead and search for Anoop. And you can see right there, I get a result. It's amazing, right? Let's go look at what the code looks like real quick. So when we go to VS Code, I'm going to close all of these, and let's open up our new recipe. So we were on the Apex tab, so where should I go look for this recipe? What's it going to start with? Apex! You are more brilliant than you think, y'all. Yes. We're going to go to the Apex, and we were looking at the wire method to property function?
With params.
Thank you. All right, so let's look at the HTML real quick. We see, again, our HTML template tags. We see some Lightning base components. And then we're seeing a little bit more complicated syntax here. So now, notice I have my Lightning input, my search. That's where I was typing for a contact. But then I have another template tag right here. And what is this looking like? If true,
It's like our conditional rendering.
yeah, we're getting conditional stuff. I can conditionally render things. So when I searched for a contact and that name appeared below the search box, that's this right here. If there's data, show me this. If there's an error, show me this. So we're able to conditionally render just using that if true. There's also a twin of if false. A little more straightforward. Okay, so here now we're getting this, we know this curly bracket syntax. What did we just learn about that thing? What does that mean?
Binding.
Yeah, it's binding to something. And what file should we go look in to see what it's binding to? Yes! So let's open up the JavaScript. Now this is a whole lot more exciting, right? Okay, So now we're seeing on our import statement, let's just look at this. We've got lightning element, we've got track, and now we have this new thing called wire, which we're going to look at. But we're getting more stuff from the Lightning Web Components engine. And then, speaking of other libraries and other modules, other ways to import, we're going to import something called find contacts from, speaking of a long URL, at salesforce/apex/contactcontroller.findContacts. Rolls right off the tongue, right? But it's actually really amazing because this is saying I want to import something, this at Salesforce decorator, maybe I shouldn't call that a decorator, this at Salesforce syntax, which is because it's not a decorator, but this at Salesforce means I want to import something specific to this org. Now, where we asked where does LWC come from, and it's the global magic of the platform, things that are in this at Salesforce are, they belong to this org. And I want to do something with the Apex in this org. And in fact, the Apex class is called contact controller. And the method I need is find contacts. That's all we're doing. So if I want to import another piece of Apex, let's say I have another class that I want to use, I can do import, let's see, and look at what I'm getting. Remember that whole thing of helping you right here? I'm getting syntax about my import statement. And let's do, we'll do from at Salesforce/Apex. And then we're going to get
A different class.
yes, or if I could say account, there isn't one, but I'm going to get stuff in my org now, and I can start seeing things as we're going, and that's where the control space is going to help you with the more IntelliSense here. But you would just do another import statement right below.
So while Aura components were limited to one controller, this
No such limit.
go and get it anywhere.
Yep.
Why do we need the brackets around importing the lightning element, but not with the Apex method?
That's a great question. So because we're doing it as this is a singular import. Here we're getting more than one import. So
Even when we had just lightning element, didn't we have the brackets there?
yep, we did. Because it's initializing it as an array anyway, and that's just a syntax that Kevin's going to tell us more about.
It's a good question. So there's two types of imports and two types of corresponding exports, and one's called named exports and one's called the default export. And they correspond to named imports and the default imports. So what it is with the braces, you're basically saying, I'd like to import a set of named exports from LWC, in this case lightning element, track, and wire. From Apex, the at Salesforce Apex, and some other ones that you'll probably see, with their default exports. And so, in particular, when you're importing Apex and a couple other things, we always give you default exports. Under the covers, there's some benefits, because you're probably wondering, like, why did we do this? And immediately the thing I'll say is the reason that we did this is that if you go at some other time and you decide to rename your Apex class, we can understand the relationship and automatically update your code, and the rest of your code will automatically work.
Which is part of Kevin's favorite thing that's built into Lightning Web Components. And what is that?
Referential integrity. So another example is when you are accessing, when we'll get to it, SObjects, and you want to import and reference your custom object or an account or a field on it, you do a similar syntax.
Let's look at that right now, actually. So is that, which is that dynamic record form? There it is.
Yeah.
Static or dynamic?
Static.
Static, yes. We're going to look at that right now, just so that you see what that looks like. Again, notice the at Salesforce, but this time it's schema, which means objects and fields.
Yep, so the first, all 4 lines are importing fields. So in these cases, you can see the contact name, contact.phone, title, email, and so forth. And that gives you a handle to that. And so a bunch of things fall out of this, one of which is it makes using those fields in other things. So using it in logic, for example, when you call Apex easier, when you use some other wire stuff that we'll get to a lot easier, when you use the base components to build out a form, and you'd like to say, I'd like to place this field here, or simply, here are 7 fields, go and lay them out for me automatically. You can do this, and the benefit to you as a developer is several. One of which is, you actually get autocomplete on this. As you are typing, you'll get IntelliSense. So if you do it at Salesforce schema and you hit that control space, you will then start to get...
Interesting imports sometimes, but there we go.
Yeah. You'll start to get
Things like the phone field, the email field.
So helps type. 2, when you actually push this up to your org, we then validate that it exists. So no more typos.
Yay.
No more runtime discovery, but instead you get compile time discovery that you're correct or you have mistakes. And then third, after the fact, that means if somebody, some other developer perhaps, tries to go and delete one of these fields, we can say, you can't delete it because these components depend on it. And then on top of that, when you go and you package your stuff, we now understand, oh, this component depends on this custom field. I need to bring it along in the package or the change set for you automatically.
Does it account for, it used to be that Apex was really good at accounting for namespace, okay? But JavaScript was not, so we ended up with a lot of wrapper classes. Does this follow?
So we have solved that problem for you. So it does the namespace stuff correctly. It also allows you to traverse objects. So there's a dog wandering around. You can do up to 4 objects plus 1 field traversal like you can in Sockle. So if you want to go from your opti, like opportunity, .account, .created by, .name, you can do so. And we'll do the correct referential integrity all the way through it.
Yep.
Can you get like all the fields from an object, or can you get all the methods from a class without having to name every one?
No, you cannot. And the reason that we do that is we don't want you to go in by doing so, you're then effectively saying, I depend on everything.
Every single thing. Yep.
So we require you to enumerate which ones you actually depend
Yep.
on.
No, star select every field from the account object, which never changes and only has a few fields anyway. We don't. Yeah. Yeah.
So will this let me rename fields?
Yes. So if you go into like Object Manager to rename a field, and then you pull your source again, you'll actually see it renamed. And going back to our previous question about, well, why is it that it's just, why do I do name field there and I don't do curly braces name field? One of the reasons is part of the language restriction in order to basically allow us to do this rename here without having to change your variable name. So the rest of your code, that reference name field, always continues to work, even if you went and changed contact name to be contact.monkey.
Yeah.
The variable that you imported as name field, will still reference through the rest of your code and it will compile and work fine.
The old contact.monkey.
But it would be monkey__C here?
Yes. Yep, so the key, that's a good point.
Just wanted to check.
And so with default imports,
It's the API name.
what you're doing is you're giving it a variable name. You're saying
Yes.
effectively the equivalent of like, give me a lect
You were
or a
abstracting
const here.
Yep.
Yes.
Yep. So the last, oh, keep going. Yep.
What you call name field, can I define that to be
You
something?
get to
Yes.
choose as you like.
So this could be,
Monkey.
Yeah.
exactly. We had a question in the second
And
row?
our examples follow a pattern
Stop.
that we have found is we've written a lot of this code that works well for us to differentiate what are objects, what are fields, because you will use them in different places, different
Yeah.
contexts. So we found this pattern works well. If you find one that works well, great.
So if you go to your OR using the GUI from the OR and you change the field name there and you go open this file in and you see it.
You have to pull, but yes, it will change, it will reflect, it will update. You got to make sure that what's on your computer is in sync, but it will update. Yep,
And then open it like become like contact.name too. I can
exactly.
say, oh.
Yep, yep, yep. So I'm going to jump back to our Apex wire method with params that we were just looking at. And I want to go back down. So now we've looked at, speaking of which, we have some consts here that have not gone away. But so we have track search key here. And we know now that that track decorator means what?
Updates the UI.
Yeah. We want to keep track of what's going on and make that reroute. Yep. So we have something called search key, and then we have this @wire here. And I want us to remember we imported, let's get this here, we imported this thing called find contacts. And as I hover over it, I'm getting information that it accepts a parameter called search key. What this is it's telling me about my Apex method. This find contacts method in Apex accepts a parameter called search key. I'm getting this insight into my code right here in my JavaScript file, again because of the language services that we're shipping with this tooling. So this find contacts thing, we're connecting it to another decorator here, this @wire decorator. And the second half here, in this JSON object, you'll see that we're passing along a parameter called search key, and we have this $ syntax here, which is wiring it up to our tracked parameter. This is how you're going to do dynamic values in your JavaScript. If you want to pass in whatever the value of search key is, it's that $ and in a string format. So Kevin, do we want to talk about wire service?
Absolutely. So wire, another decorator here, is wiring these things together. So wire is your new way of doing, well, in Aura, what are called actions. So it's the way that you go and you communicate with the server, is the primary way to do it.
Yeah.
And so what wire, as Zayne has said, is it basically says to our runtime, go and get me this data. And in particular, because that $ syntax says, go and get me this data, go and invoke my find contacts method whenever this .search key changes. And it does so in a way that is also smart. So if you have multiple components, for example, that are all calling find contacts at a contact controller, it will then only make one request to it and will cache it on the client for you automatically and take care of that. And anytime that value gets stale, it will then give you a new value.
That first use of search key : is that parameter name matching with the Apex class?
Exactly.
Exactly. Yep.
Not the variable.
Yep. So I want to show you, even more importantly, what wire does in action, why this is even cooler. Because there are other ways that you can call Apex, but using wire service gives you some very cool benefits here. And we're going to see how this looks on my very tiny browser. So I'm going to open up my developer tools. Okay, now we're going to have an interesting time with trying to make this smaller. All right. 7, there we go. Come on now. There we go. All right, we're going to scroll down to our very tiny search box. Get ready for the magic, people. All right, so we're looking at the network tab here. It's going to show us what's going on, what calls are we making, what's communicating with each other, all right? And we're going to now search for Anoop. And we can see in this very tiny column that has no name, I'm getting timings for my calls. And these is all is .apex. We're hitting the server here. I'm seeing 77 microseconds, 78, pretty consistent timings, okay?
Milliseconds.
Yes. And now I'm going to search for Amy. And we're seeing, again, calls to the server around the same time frame. All right. Now I'm going to search for Anoop again. No more entries. We didn't call the server because wire service cached it on the client. That data was already there, exactly what Kevin was talking about. It was served from the cache on the client, which is also why it's fast. So huge benefits to wire service.
We see the time there, on that line. Oh, nothing.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Yep. These were all the earlier calls we made.
Oh, okay.
Yep. So it's a huge benefit to wire service. So let's go look. Yes?
So what's happening if the record changes, or how long does it cache like someone else got?
Mm-hmm.
That is a great question. So I think we're going to show you how another type of wire works. Should we show them that?
Sure. Which one?
Records?
You want to go to the data service now?
Yeah.
Why not? So
Do data service or wire?
I don't know which recipe you're thinking.
I was thinking the wire stuff to the UI API stuff.
Come on over here.
No, you can do it. What is a good one here? Maybe get record user. That's nice because that shows two things.
Right? And my email address. Woohoo! I didn't know that. Okay.
would have guessed that one.
I know, it's very mysterious too. But yeah. Okay. So let's go look at the recipe for wire get record user. Yes. We will open up things.
So as you're showing this, I'm curious to ask the group, how many have heard of the user interface API? Okay, a handful. And how many have used it? Okay. So you're going to use it a lot more now.
It's wonderful. It's so wonderful.
Where do you want to start?
Speak louder so people
It's
hear.
wonderful because now you can get like things like, well, if you have dependent pick lists, they just work and you don't have to struggle with them. It was life-changing. Yeah.
It was life-changing. We've cured this man's pick list problems.
Do you want to start in the JavaScript controller, I'm assuming?
Sure. Yeah, so the question was around records and how long do records last for and so forth. And so the first thing I want to say is when you're getting stuff like records and a bunch of object metadata and pick lists and a bunch of other things, you no longer have to write Apex. We provide a bunch of stuff out of the box now for you, sort of like Lightning Data Service did, where we provided some capabilities for records. We've taken that and added a ton more. So a lot of the stuff you can get through User Interface API, we now sort of provide out of box as a first-class citizen.
Sorry, I want to rewind because I think I may have missed something when we first started talking about Apex. Do I still need to do Aura enabled?
Yeah, let's look at that. So let's finish up. We're going to put a pin in this real quick. Let me show you that Apex real quick because I do want you to see what that looks like. Yes, great question, Bonnie. So we're going to scroll up to our Apex classes here, and we're going to open up this contact controller class that we were just looking at with our search method one, right? And the find contacts method is the one that we were using right there. Still just Aura enabled. Aura enabled means exposed to all of the ways you can now program in Lightning, both web components and Aura. And cacheable equals true means that you can use it with that wire service. It means that this method should be allowed to have a client-side cache. It's great, use it when you can. It's an awesome performance boost. The exception is if this method of find contacts, if I snuck in a database.save, because why would you not name something find contacts and then do DML? You would not be able to have a client-side cache. So only stuff that's not doing DML.
So all my existing are enabled.
You can wire it up to your Lightning Web Components. Yep,
Awesome.
absolutely. Okay, so now, Kevin, UI API.
Great, so UI API lets you load records and object info, so describe SObject, the equivalent of it, using wire and without having to write any Apex. So we'll start with, let's start with line 2. So we do some imports again, some things that you've seen sort of before in terms of imports. In this case, we're using Lightning UI Record API. And so you'll see a whole bunch of these in the samples where we get stuff from Lightning UI Record API or UI Object Info API or UI List View API, or List API, I forget which it is. And we're pulling in particular functions from there. So we're calling two things, get record and get field value.
And again, if we hover over, you're going to get more information about what those things are exactly. But what are they?
And so get record is this thing that you can pass to wire. And it is literally saying to the wire service, go and get me a record. And so you can tell it what's the record ID and what's the list of fields that you want. And there's a bunch of other parameters. If you mouse over again, you'll see a whole bunch of stuff. And one of the things that may jump at you like, what do these question mark means? What do these crazy things means? I think some of the docs are, if you just want to scroll to the top even, I was just going to say, so the question marks basically mean the value is optional. So you don't have to specify defaults there. And then what is the type of the value that you have to provide to it? So an array of strings, layout types and so forth. So for the most part, what you have to provide is record ID. We need at least that. And then you're going to have to provide either field, layout types, or optional fields. And we can talk about what those mean.
And again, if you don't remember the exact combination, you're going to link directly to the relevant docs. So then you can know, oh yeah, this is how I use it.
So down on that line 12, we've got that wire, we've got that get record, and again, we're passing in sort of our configuration as an object. So we're passing record ID, we've got this $sign user ID, which in this case points to the $sign up to user ID, 2 pointers here.
Yeah.
And then fields, we're going to pass in a list of fields. And so this syntax you may not be familiar with, this is a JavaScript sort of shorthand syntax, where basically if you want to pass a key and a value that have the same variable name, you just have to write it once, rather than doing fields : fields. You can just write it once, which is pretty handy. And that just points up to the const that says, hey, I want to load the name field and the email field, and those we imported. So as a developer, when I coded this up, I got a bunch of IntelliSense to type this out. When I saved it to my org, it validated the schema existed. Guarantees no one's ever going to delete it and break my components. And then until I actually load the data, I just did this. And what that's going to do is it's now going to populate this user variable on line 13 with that value whenever it becomes available. And then it's also going to update that value whenever that record changes. So if another component on the page goes and updates this, goes and updates the name field or the email field, I'm going to immediately get the new data into my user variable.
Oh, sorry, do we want to go look at this in the org real quick? Or do you want to look at the HTML?
Which one? What was the first one?
Do you want to go look at this in the org or stay in the code?
Let's look at the HTML.
Yeah.
So I think if people remember what it looked like on the screen.
Can I ask a quick question about that? So when you wire it, That's in the client. And when something changes there, because it's wired, it's going to call back to the server. But that's the only direction that wire refresh is happening. If something changes on the server, it's not going to know to call.
So there is a pilot right now, so you should reach out to whomever, I don't know who it is. I go through product managers, but I'm an employee.
Yeah,
so.
I'm like, Farhan, probably. Yeah, we'll just throw out his name. Yeah, yeah. Surprise, Farhan! Yeah.
You need like an EMP API to do that, right?
We'll put his phone number up.
Yeah, that's what we'll do. Yeah. Text Farhan.
Yes, tonight.
Yeah.
He's traveling.
Yeah, he's in London, so it's
Everybody
perfect
knows.
timing. Yeah.
But what this pilot is called Live Records, and what it does is it tracks, actually under the covers is actually using EMP API.
Yeah.
So that if you change that record as this user, you change it via Apex or a Visualforce page, we detect it on the server and we push events up to the client.
Right.
The Lightning Data Service understands that, goes and fetches the new value, brings it to the client, and then gives it to every component that used it through @wire.
Yeah.
And says, here's your data.
Yeah. And notifies you that the cache is invalid, essentially.
And so, if you pause and if we reflect on that for a sec, so what that means is you've used @wire, you've written no Apex code, and now you're getting changes regardless of where the origin of that data change happened, whether it's Apex or Visualforce or Lightning Web Components or an Aura component. You'll just get the new data as though it was just part of the initial load.
That's
Pretty cool.
It's
very cool.
Fall?
It's in pilot right now. Don't buy anything based on what we say. Yeah.
That's exciting.
In the back, you had a question?
Yeah, so the limit of the memory records or the size, any limits apply when it's
So you just
Limits to size.
2,000?
In terms of the sockle call,
Yeah.
like, or in terms of,
Client-side cache.
it is large where the short version is it's actually quite a large number of records. I don't recall it is, but it's large. We do a bunch of sampling to figure out what's a typical user session and keep it well within 95th percentile of users won't hit the limit. And then it is subject to change.
Yeah.
That's the thing. So as we can bump it up, we'll continue to push it up.
And if you're thinking about, oh, I have quite a few records, thousands of records, and people are dealing with it, and how do I handle things like pagination? There are examples of that in our sample apps, especially a sample app called Dream Invest is actually going to show you best practices for handling those large data sets and pagination in combination with this client-side caching.
So look at the HTML. So how do we use this? Why don't you walk us through?
It's HTML. No, so we can see here, okay, so we're starting with our base components, but now we've already talked a little bit about this. You see we've got this if true going on, and we're rendering some stuff. So now I'm gonna put it to you all. I'm gonna render this ID and name, information about a user, if user.data. What do we think that means?
If you got the data.
Yeah,
If it's not,
the
no.
data related to what?
It's not an error.
The user, exactly. And if we go back to the JavaScript file, what is called user? What was that thing called user? Where does it appear? What line?
13.
13, yeah, it's the thing we wired, exactly. The wired value right there. And you get two things with wire. You'll notice we had some dot notation. We had user.data and user.error. What do we think those mysterious values mean? We already know this means data. What do we think error might mean?
Error?
Yeah, you get an error.
Go back to the JavaScript.
Mm-hmm.
If I were to throw an Aura exception for my handler, would it show up in that error?
If you were calling Apex. So this here, we're not calling any Apex, but yes, if you were calling Apex, it would show up in error. Yep.
Is 13 part of 12?
Yes.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
So it really should be over there, right?
It's going to always be on 13.
You can put it on. So that decorator syntax applies to basically the next token. So whether it's a property, a method, a class. So the ones that we've seen so far is we're always attaching to a property. We had @track, name I forget what. Greeting.
Yep.
@track greeting. We had @wire user. We had another @wire with Apex to another property as well.
Yep.
So you're saying wire up this method, which we imported up there.
Yep.
Provide it with these parameters and assign what you get back to the
This.
user.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yep. That's wiring to a property, as well as using the wire to get a user.
So we've got some stuff down here which you should probably touch on, name and email, where we use this get field. So those are
We
things that
should.
we imported before.
Yeah.
And
Anyone used getters and setters before? Where did we use those before?
Visual Force.
Visual Force. Guess what? People who've only been developing in Visual Force, you're back in style. So this get pattern here, we're returning a value here. It's very straightforward, but this recipe actually isn't the most exciting place to see this in action. I want to show you this get pattern. Let's go look at another recipe to do that.
Did you have to use the getter? In the HTML, you use the getter, I think. You
In the-
couldn't just go user.name, user.fieldName.
You could, but there's a reason we're doing that. So we're going to take a detour because your question is the right one. So let's go look in the org again. I'm going to go to the composition tab because we're going to talk about, sorry. We're going to go back to the hello tab. This is it. I skipped over this middle part because this is where the get set pattern is going to make a little more sense. So this hello expressions here. We have two places we can input a first name, we can input a last name, and then we have this thing down here that says uppercase full name with nothing going on right now. So I'm going to enter the text here and text in the last name. And we notice I did not use any caps, and apparently Google thinks I don't know how to spell nomical. But the uppercase full name, if I zoom in, what do we notice here? Yeah, it's uppercased, right? So something is happening between what I typed in and what's getting displayed here. It's being transformed, operated on. So if we go look at the code, let's, okay, I'm going to keep our get record user JS open for a minute. We'll close these other ones. And we're going to go to hello expressions. And we're going to open up the JavaScript and the HTML. And let's, JavaScript again. We saw lightning input, pretty simple, first name, last name. We have some change handler. And then you'll see here, we just have a simple HTML tag with our uppercase full name. And what did I already conveniently highlight, maybe because I've shown this demo before? What is that?
Binding.
It's a binding. It's something in our JavaScript file. So where do you see get uppercase full name? That name we used on our HTML, uppercase full name. Where is it? What line?
16.
Do I see it anywhere else in here?
Nope.
No. This get and then thing, just like in Visual Force, it's become a property. And the reason we're using it is because we're doing some sorts of transformation, right? So here, we're taking, we know now the syntax already, $. We're taking the value of first name and the value of last name, and we're doing some transformation, trimming white space, transforming it to uppercase. So if we jump back to our get record user, this thing called name, this thing called email, what are we doing here? Kevin?
well, we're calling a function called getFieldValue, which we imported from before. And we're going to say, here's the data that we got, the record. And the field that I want to get out of here is name field and email field. And those, remember, I imported from up here. So regardless of, I get that, again, IntelliSense, I get all that referential integrity, and what I'm getting here is the name. Now there's a corresponding function, which I'll just call out, getFieldName, there's getFieldDisplayValue.
Yes.
getFieldValue and getFieldDisplayValue. And it depends whether you want to get effectively the raw value or the display value. And you ask what are the differences. Best example is if you're looking at something like a currency value or a date value,
Yep.
the display value is going to be formatted to the current user's
So
locale.
you're going to get locale. And same thing with internationalization, and you want to make sure if you've done a lot of work to have custom labels, that's how you're going to want to display those labels.
But you can imagine that if you're getting a date and you want to do a date calculation, you don't want it formatted. You just want the actual raw number, so you can do subtraction or addition or whatever.
And the reason we're doing this pattern of the return and then we're doing the get field value is, again, think about referential integrity. What if suddenly the name field becomes monkey and I did .name? I'm going to have to do a whole lot of updates in a whole lot of places to persist that change. But because we're using get field value and we're using our variable name here, then I don't have to update my code when we've made those field level changes.
And the dot data is in Aura, that would be like in your callback, your get response value,
Get return value, yeah.
get return value.
Yeah.
The display value will do a translated value as well.
It will get back, so the API will return you that translated value to the current user's locale,
we'll
et
use
cetera.
the user context.
Okay.
Yep. Yep. Yeah.
So by any chance, if I have a video transformation in my Apex, like we'll say instead of name, I have something else, like maybe instead of first name, maybe I say it as a name or something by using the video. So then I can use this format.
Correct. Effectively, at that point, you're transforming it in Apex. You're basically returning your own custom object,
Yeah,
your own
like,
custom
I
shape.
don't want to use like underscore C or whatever. I
Right.
have my own custom.
Yeah. So if you called your Apex, you get back whatever your Apex method returns is what you're going to get back as a JavaScript object. You're responsible then for traversing into it to the right place.
Yep. And you can still use dot notation. That's still a valid thing. You can still do it, and you're going to see recipes that also do that. But then you're going to need to manage those dependencies.
Then what will happen to line number 4?
So if you're calling your own Apex, right, and you've hard-coded the dot name down below, then we can't change your hard coding. We have not solved that problem yet. But if you're using, again, this variable name to get at the thing that's coming back from your Apex, it should be okay, right?
Can you show the Apex for this get field value, the Apex class for the?
So this is an Apex. This is coming from the UI API, this import right here. The platform is doing this for you. We are fetching a user and displaying details with not a single Apex call.
Okay.
We want to show them an Apex example where we do get SObject value.
We can. Which recipe are you thinking?
I don't know which one.
Ha! Me either. That's why I asked you. Okay.
I always just do code search.
But guess what the good thing is that I thought it would show up here. Static schema? Do we think that's probably right?
Sure.
Yeah. It has the name schema in it. I'm guessing that has something to do with SObjects. So Apex static schema. We're looking at Amy Taylor, VP of Engineering. We're calling an Apex method, and we're getting SObject values.
Nice.
Right?
You didn't give us her email.
No.
No, yeah.
No, she did. At demo.net, right? Right? Email her tonight. Right now, in fact. Okay, so let's go look at Apex static schema. All right, open this up. We'll close all these. Go up to Apex and static schema. Want to start in the JavaScript or the HTML?
JavaScript.
Always. All right. Here we go. Let's see. What do you want to show them, Kevin?
Okay, so let's do lines 3 and then the imports, and then we'll come back to 2.
Okay.
So, go ahead.
Well, so line 3, everyone in the room should probably be cluing into, what are we doing on line 3 here now? Yeah, we're importing this get single contact, and what are we getting it from? Where is it coming from? The platform? Yeah. It's coming from Apex, and we know this for lots of reasons because we're all brilliant, but mostly because it says it, right? So we're importing this get single contact method. All right, and now line 2, what in the world is that? Kevin?
So what we've done is we're shipping a couple utility functions off the @Salesforce Apex. So again, it's just a module. It's not I want to pull some stuff from general Apex, not specific to my org, not specific to my class. I just want some Apex utilities. And a really valuable one is get SObject value. So it understands the shape of SObjects and allows you to combine SObjects that you return out of your Apex class with the static imports of your schema.
And so the way we're using it down here, what are we doing here?
So in this case, why don't we'll talk through this. So what we're saying in get title, for example, and you can imagine where this is probably going to go. We're probably going to use title in the HTML. We're saying I want to return the value, and I'm going to do one of two things. That question mark is what they call ternary operator, which basically is shortened version of an if statement.
Which you can use in Apex, right? So you can still use it here. You could also use it in Aura. We're getting ternary operator right here.
So if this.contact.data is true, so if we have data, call and return the value of get SObject value, passing it the data, passing it the SObject, and here's the field of it that I want. And so it'll do the traversal into the SObject field, possibly up to 5 levels deep, like Sockle supports, and give you back the field value. And if that value, if this.contact.data is false, we don't have any data yet, we just return an empty string.
Yep. What's the difference doing it this way and the previous way? We were the UI API.
So the difference here is that the way that we're fetching that contact, right? Here we're calling Apex. We are not using the wire service or the UI API. We are calling our Apex method to get a contact, but then we want to still have that ability to have, if someone changes a field, I don't want to have to rewrite my code. So this is the value of this get SObject value, is it's going to give you that boost of the referential integrity we were talking about. But now coming back from your Apex method, I want to make sure that I can reference things that no matter what we do to change the API name of the field, I want to still display the data in a stable way. And that's this pattern.
So when we get contact and get a single contact, we shouldn't just say like contact.name.
Right. I mean, you can. Again, it's the whole thing of if it works for you, great. But there's a huge benefit here of a little bit more verbose code gives you that referential integrity. Yep.
The one thing I'll pitch, because I love user interface API, I think everyone in this room should use it, is that historically when you've called Apex from Aura, you are responsible for applying object CRUD and all FLS and sharing rules. UI API does that for you automatically in the context of the user. So you don't have to deal with that at all, which makes it often a whole lot easier to write code. It's a whole lot less stuff to author and to maintain, to test. Because you'll write Apex tests, right?
It's gonna make security review easier too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's a really big one. The other one is that all of the UI API stuff, we do extensive caching on the client. So Zayne had showed us how we did caching of Apex with that cacheable equals true thing. All of the UI API stuff automatically has cacheable true set. You don't have to specify it, which means then the more components that use it, the more cache hits you're going to get, which means the faster your stuff is going to be. It also then plugs into that pilot that I mentioned, that whole live records pilot, where we're able to tell you, hey, some other technology went and changed this record, here's your new version of it. We can't do that for you automatically through the Apex route.
So the last recipe I want to show you before we open it up to maybe some general Q&A, which will maybe necessitate some more demos, is I want to show you how to build for Lightning App Builder. So let's go look at that really quickly. So we're going to go back into the org real quick. And we're going to go to the Composition tab. And the Composition tab is pretty interesting for a lot of reasons. It's going to show you how to nest components within each other. This is an outer component with then this contact tile in it. It's going to show you how do I deal with lists of objects and what's the syntax to deal with a list. We're going to see some other stuff about searching. But down here in the lower right-hand corner, you're also going to see Composition with App Builder. So we have 3 values displayed right here. And those of you in the back, you might have to just take my word for it. But we have a pick list value, a string value, and a number value. And right now, pick list value is just saying option 1. The string value is blank, and we have a number value of 10. And this recipe comes to life when you open Lightning App Builder. So let's do that. And when we click on our little Composition with App Builder component, over here on the right-hand side, as you would hope to see, we have what in the world of Aura would have been our design attributes, our design time parameters. Right here we have a pick list value that magically is a pick list with options that we can change. And if I click it, as always, it's updating in the very, very tiny thing here on Lightning App Builder. It's updating in real time. We have a string value with, what is this magical thing? Placeholder text, right? Telling me as a user, what should I do here? And so I can say, yay, and spell beautifully. And we have a number value here, and I can set it to 11 million D. And it's amazing, and I will save, and oh my goodness, lots of things are happening. Yes, I'm getting a pop-up that there's no way we're moving on until I acknowledge that something happened. That I have, and in fact, a message here of there's an invalid value 4, and it's telling me exactly what the issue was, my number value. And when I close this pop-up, guess what else I'm getting? Scoped to the input where I messed up. And I'm getting a value here, yeah, of telling me exactly what I did wrong. So then if I change this to a valid value and save, yay, voila, and we'll go back to the page so that we can see it slightly bigger. And yay, my amazing spelling is here, my pick list value, the number value, it's all great. So let's go look at the code.
It's in your favorite file.
It's in my favorite file. And it will be yours too, I promise. All right. So composition with app builder, we're going to go right to the XML. And we have a whole lot of more exciting stuff going on here. So we see we've listed a couple targets, as in the pages it's allowed to be on, app pages and home pages. And then down here, we're getting this whole target configs. This is where I get to control the behavior of my component. And if you'll notice here, this targets, notice how I'm passing in more than one thing here. But now suddenly, if this is where, if I only want certain things to happen on Lightning app pages and different things to happen on home pages, I don't have to pass in both of those values. I get to separate them out. And I can have completely different design parameters appearing on completely different Lightning pages, all here together.
So you can have multiple config.
Yes, you can.
That's cool.
All in one place.
Can you also put in the description that becomes the info bubble?
So let's look at how we did that. Yeah, so look at this. Let's look at, I want to show you the number value where we saw that neat validation and all of those things. And let's look at what I did to actually do that. I'm going to have to zoom out real quick so we can get it all on one thing. I said, I gave it a name of number value. I declared its type as integer. I gave it a minimum and a maximum threshold and a default value. And that's it. And the platform took care of, we're going to give the user a message that lets them know the number value is wrong. We're going to scope it to the property where they messed up. You're getting a lot of power just coming from Lightning App Builder by just declaring the behavior here. I didn't have to write the code for that error messaging.
In the design file, you could add another parameter called description that became the info bubble.
Yes, and that's what we got there of type something here and all of the information.
No, that's the placeholder.
Yep.
No,
Oh, yes. You
info
can,
bubble.
yes, you get the info bubble too. Yep. Same thing. Yep. Doesn't go away. Yep. So it's all here, all in one place.
That's cool.
It's good. Yeah. So we want to take some questions?
The one last thing I'd love to show them are just forms. The Lightning form stuff, just because it's so powerful and so easy to use.
Which form? Do you want to show contact form?
No, the one when you go to contacts and then go to like sort of like the static one we did.
Yeah.
But not the wire stuff. Instead, just
The Lightning data service?
Yeah.
Yeah. Record form.
Yeah.
Dynamic contact?
Either one.
Yeah. Why not? It has a very exciting name. Okay. So this is when we went, Lightning record form. Who's used Lightning record form in Aura?
Should we show them the UI?
Yes. I think, let's show them the code, and then we'll show them in the UI. I like the mixing it up. So Lightning record form base component, those of you that have used it, don't spoil the surprise. We're using something called Lightning record form, and we're passing it an object API name. And, of course, we have our curly bracket syntax, which means it's binding, it's a property, that's great. The other thing I want you to notice, though, those of you who are coming from the Aura, do you notice something about the syntax here of Lightning record form versus how you'd get at it in Aura? Dashes, kebab case. It's a stylistic difference. You're just going to want to pay attention to it. Where you saw camel case and colons in the Aura world, you're going to see kebab case here in the world of Lightning.
Now, a shout out to that is that's not our creation. This is standard HTML, and in particular, this is what are called web components. And you probably hear similarity of web components and Lightning web components. So those tags specifically are called custom elements, and that's part of the Lightning component spec. And so we adhere to that.
Yep.
Which then also means, as Dan has talked about, ESLint and the standard tools, you can use all sorts of standard tools to understand standard HTML, and they can do stuff with your code.
And now that we know that kebab case is just a standard convention, if I see something like C-view source, what do we think that might be?
Component.
Yeah, and it's coming from what namespace? C, which is mine, the default namespace. So this is how you get a child component in here. I'm embedding another component called view source, and you're going to see that all over recipes. It's the same view source, which gives you the little footer that says, do you want to look at the code on GitHub, and lets you click. It's this C view source component. If I open up my file directory, there's view source. And and exactly, that's what you want to notice. The name view source, its name, as in all of our other ones, it's camel case, but I reference it with the kebab case, right? In my HTML. Okay, so we're using a Lightning base component, Lightning record form. We're passing an object API name and a record ID, and we're doing some fields. This is sort of looking familiar by this time, and we're binding it to a lot of things. Do we want to show them in the UI or look at the JavaScript first?
JavaScript.
Yeah. All right, so in the JavaScript, ta-da! It's pretty tiny. Yeah, right? It's super complicated here. We're importing Lightning element. We're importing something called API. That's another decorator. And we're adding those to record ID and object name. Those are API decorators. And then we're passing in a list of fields, right? Our array of fields here. So again, you can go ahead and use it right here if you want. You don't have to use the get field syntax. We can just pass in a static list. OK, so let's go look at what it looks like in the UI. So I'm going to go to the contact record, because that's where these all live. That's where you'll see these recipes. And ta-da! That's the one we were just looking at, record form dynamic. One line, base component code, and look at all this stuff we're getting. Yeah, and I mean, it has little pencils. Look at that. It knows what to do. If I do something like change the account here, notice what's happening in the UI. It's giving me a pick list. It's responding to the data that I have. If I add the wrong kind of, we just talked about the email addresses in this org because they are pretty exciting. If I try to save an invalid email, look at what I'm getting. Field level validation and messaging. Did we write code for that in the JavaScript? You saw it. No. This is also part of what's built into this Lightning record form. It's metadata aware. So it's going to give you the right UI rendering. It's going to give you data validation. You're not writing the code for it. It's aware of what's happening in the platform. And
you would have to go back to the contact record to actually change the email.
No, all I could do is actually just like give it a real email address.
Oh, just the format.
Yep, just the format. And then save, and now Caroline is at demo.org instead of .net or whatever she was before. .biz.
Yeah, and if you zoom out for a sec, can you scroll up? Notice that, or I guess if you want to hit the details,
Yes.
we change it to demo.org.
Right, there it is.
You see it's all in sync across all of the components. So as long as you use the base components, all this cross-component synchronization stuff just happens for free.
So I know why you needed the record ID. Why did you need the object name?
You need to specify it so we know what the field types are that you're passing to it, basically.
We need to know, so it's metadata aware, but the name field on my _C custom object is very different than the name field on contact object, right? That's why it needs the object context as well, because just because something has an API name doesn't mean I know what the metadata type is.
And so one thing I just want to really emphasize here is like these form components, and there's a bunch of examples here, are super powerful. And we talked a lot about Wire and connecting to Apex and user interface API. But really where you should start is at these form components, because you can then just write a bunch of declarative tags, just some HTML, a little bit of JavaScript, and all this stuff just comes for free. It takes care of, as I was saying, it knew that the salutation, for example, was a pick list. It knew that the account was a lookup and took care of rendering that, figuring out the right type of input and output field, plus all the validation stuff. That's a lot of logic to have to create. And so these forms just take care of it for you. And if you don't like just the default behavior, you want to apply default values, there's tons of hooks that those components offer to allow you to do that. And the documentation is the place to go look for it.
Yep. How are we doing on time, Daniel? Do we have time for some Q&A? Should we get to the last bit of the slides and a little bit of giveaway? What do you want to do?
Yeah, I think we should start wrapping up the demo, move
Yep.
on to the giveaway, and then leave folks some time to hang out, have another drink, and do some more networking.
Cool, awesome. Well, so Kevin, you should hang out with me right now because we're going to do the most exciting part. So Cynthia and Daniel, how do we want to do this? Do you guys want to ask questions? How do we want to handle the very exciting next part, which is, let me get back to my slides, because who doesn't love slides? Oh man, the Chrome and I today. All right, if I go to presentation mode, we are ready for a Lightning Web Components pop quiz. Woo! With swag. Okay, how do you want to do this, my friend?
So we have 4 prizes and 4 questions, right?
Yes.
So I guess it'll be like first person that raises their hand with the right and answers with the correct answer wins 4 shots. Does that sound good?
That sounds great. And Kevin is going to be the spotter of who's first.
Okay.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh.
Right?
Yeah. I'm just
It's a 2-part thing. It's very carefully. You have to not only be recognized as wanting to answer the question, you have to have the right answer. All right? We ready? Okay. So question 1. Where should you put your template markup in a Lightning Web component? Ooh.
The gentleman in the blue shirt was first, actually.
Yes! Ding, 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 in the HTML file. Fuzzy blanket. All right. Okay. Are we ready for question 2? Kevin, are you ready? How does the @track decorator affect a JavaScript property?
You took your hand down, so I think you, I'm sorry, I think you were soon after.
Marks it for binding.
Well, I have to keep track of the second person that reads
Yeah.
Oh, that's not really fair.
It extends the JavaScript property.
Okay. Do you know the back in the brown shirt? I think it's brown.
It re-renders the UI?
It's reactive.
It tracks.
It marks the property as reactive. So when the property changes, it will re-render in the HTML.
He got it.
This is a friendly and good group, yes.
All right, this is a pretty coveted item.
Wow.
This is a Odie Lego. Odie Lego. Sell it on the black market.
All right. Are we ready for the 3rd question?
Yep.
So what tool do you use to create a Lightning component bundle?
VS Code.
The question wasn't asked yet, but some of your hands up.
Yeah.
Speed reader.
Do you, anything else more specific?
The woman in the black shirt was the second hand up. Yeah.
Yes.
That's what Pat just
What,
said.
the Visual Studio extensions? Is that
Someone else shouted it out. Who shouted it?
CLI.
That is exactly right. The Salesforce CLI is, in fact, the tool you want to use.
So,
Why is that the answer?
full bag.
Why is that the answer?
Because it's correct.
VS Code.
VS Code is using.
Yes.
The tool is VS Code.
The tool is the Salesforce CLI. So technically, you could open up a command prompt window and create a Lightning Web component.
Yes.
It is not Visual Studio Code itself. Yep. Sneaky, sneaky question. Yes. Okay, the 4th and final question. What does the cacheable equals tool to true apex annotation mean?
A bunch of people already want. I think if you win a prize,
Yeah.
you can't put your hands back up.
All right.
The gentleman in the plaid shirt was the first up.
Yeah, it will say on the client side, on the server side, without calling this.
Yes, it allows the platform to create and manage a client-side cache for the data returned by Apex.
Right. So, since we're in Chinatown,
So thank you all for playing our Lightning Web Components pop quiz. And we're going to skip here. If you want to learn even more, which of course you do, you should take a picture of this tiny little link down here that apparently you can't necessarily see, that is sforce.co/LWC, all lowercase. That's a short link to a trail mix that is dedicated to all things Lightning Web Components, specifically for this Global Developer Week, which thank you for letting us join you to kick it off. And we're updating this all the time, and on Monday we added, say, 4 new modules that came out, but we're gonna take you through setting up your tooling, and why is the Salesforce CLI the right answer, and taking you through the basics of building in Lightning Web Components, what should you know, ins and outs, as well as you can build a bear tracking app with Lightning Web Components. Who doesn't wanna do that?
Cody track.
It's all here for you, yeah. So Daniel, any other additions?
My only,
Yes.
all right.
Thank you. Thank you. Awesome. Thanks, everybody.